Story 1: The Man Outside My Window. It was late one Friday night in the fall of 2017. I was home alone in my apartment, a small one-bedroom place on the second floor of an older building. I had just gotten home from work and was scrolling through my phone in bed, trying to relax. The night was quiet except for the occasional car driving down the street outside. The building I lived in was nothing special, just an old brick place that had thin walls and creaky floors. My bedroom window faced a side alley that hardly anyone used. It was usually dark back there, with one flickering streetlight at the far end. Because of that, I never really worried about anyone hanging around outside my window. I remember setting my phone down and closing my eyes for a while. The apartment was silent, but then, faintly, I heard something. At first I thought it was just the pipes or maybe the neighbors moving around, but then I realized it was coming from outside. It sounded like a soft crunching noise. Leaves being stepped on. Slow, deliberate footsteps. I froze in bed and strained my ears, trying to be sure I wasn't imagining it. The sound was steady, almost like someone was pacing back and forth in the alley. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was probably just a cat or maybe someone passing through. But when I peeked over at my window, I noticed something strange. The blinds, which I always kept closed, were slightly tilted, as if someone had pressed against them from the outside. My heart started racing. I sat up, debating whether or not to look. Finally, curiosity got the better of me. I slowly walked over and pulled the blinds apart just enough to peek outside. That's when I saw him. A man was standing directly below my window, his face tilted upward. He was looking straight at me. The dim light from the street lamp barely reached him, but I could make out enough to see his eyes and the faint grin on his face. I jumped back immediately, letting the blinds fall shut. My chest tightened, and a wave of panic hit me. I didn't know what to do. Should I call the police? Should I yell out the window? My phone was sitting on the bed, and I grabbed it with shaking hands. Before I could dial, I heard it again, the crunch of footsteps. Only this time, they weren't pacing. They were moving closer. I could hear them directly under the window now, slower, heavier. I swear I could even hear his breathing, ragged and steady. I called out in a shaky voice, "Who's there?" There was no response. Just silence. For a moment I thought maybe he had left. But then the silence broke with the sound of my window screen being pushed. The metal squealed, as if he was trying to remove it. My stomach dropped. I ran into the living room, turned on every light, and called 911. My voice was trembling as I told the dispatcher there was someone trying to get into my apartment through the window. She told me to stay on the line and keep all the doors locked. As I stood in the middle of my living room, I heard a loud thud. Something hit the glass hard enough to rattle it. I screamed and ran to the front door, making sure the deadbolt was locked. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears as I stayed crouched near the door, clutching the phone. The dispatcher said an officer was already on the way. She asked me if I could still hear the man, but at that point, everything was quiet again. No footsteps, no banging, just silence. And somehow, that silence felt even worse. I stayed frozen in place until the flashing red and blue lights lit up the walls of my apartment. 2 officers knocked at my door, and I quickly let them in. They searched the alley with their flashlights, but by then the man was gone. One of the officers came back shaking his head. "No sign of him," he said. "But your window screen has been pried halfway out." Hearing that made me shiver. He had definitely been trying to get in. They took my statement and told me to stay somewhere else for the night, just in case. I ended up crashing at a friend's place. When I came back the next morning, the alley looked so normal, so empty it was almost hard to believe it happened. But the bent window screen was still there. And the worst part was knowing that, whoever he was, he had been right outside my window, watching me for who knows how long. I moved out of that apartment just 2 months later. To this day, I have no idea who that man was or what he wanted. But I'll never forget the way he stood there in the dark, staring up at me with that faint, chilling grin.
Story 2. The wrong ride home. It was around 11 p.m. when I left my friend's house after a small get-together. I didn't have a car at the time, so I usually relied on rideshare apps to get around. The night was cold, and the suburban streets were quiet as I stood on the curb waiting for my driver to arrive. I had ordered the ride on my phone, and the app showed the car was just a few minutes away. It was supposed to be a gray Honda Civic with the license plate ending in 729. I remember feeling relieved because the streets felt unusually empty that night. A few minutes later, a dark sedan pulled up slowly to the curb. The windows were tinted, and I couldn't see much inside. I checked the plate quickly ended in 729, just like the app said. Without thinking much more, I opened the back door and got inside. The first thing I noticed was how dark it was inside the car. The interior lights didn't turn on when I entered, which was strange. The driver didn't greet me either, which most rideshare drivers usually did. He just pulled off the curb and started driving. At first, I didn't say anything. Maybe he was just quiet. But then I glanced at the dashboard. The screen that usually displayed GPS directions was completely off. Instead, the radio was playing a low, static noise, like it wasn't tuned to any station. "Are you using the GPS?" I asked, trying to sound casual. The driver didn't respond. He just kept his eyes on the road. His hands were gripping the wheel tightly, almost too tightly. I repeated myself louder, but still, nothing. That's when I started feeling uneasy. I pulled out my phone to check the app, and my stomach dropped. The app showed that my ride had been canceled a few minutes earlier. The driver I was supposed to meet hadn't even arrived yet. I was sitting in the wrong car. My pulse started pounding in my ears as I realized what was happening. Slowly reached for the door handle, but the child lock was on. I pulled at it a few times, trying not to make it obvious, but it wouldn't budge. The driver must have noticed because I felt the car speed up. Stop the car, I said firmly, trying to sound braver than I felt. Finally, he spoke, but his voice was low and unsettling. He said, "We'll be there soon. That's all." No explanation, no detail, just that one sentence. My breathing grew heavy. I quickly texted my friend. "I got in the wrong car. Call me." I hit send and prayed she would notice right away. The driver kept turning down quieter streets, away from the main roads, deeper into the residential area. That's when my phone rang. It was my friend calling me back. I answered on speaker, pretending everything was normal. "Hey, yeah, I'm in the car now," I said loudly. She immediately caught on and asked, "What's the car? Where are you?" I noticed the driver glancing at the phone, his jaw tightening. My friend's voice got louder. "I called the police. They're tracking your location." "Where exactly are you taking her?" she demanded, even though she wasn't on speaker with the cops. The driver's hands shook slightly on the wheel, and he suddenly made a sharp turn back toward the main road. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. He didn't say a word the entire time, just drove faster and faster. Then, after a few tense minutes, he pulled over abruptly near a convenience store. Without looking at me, he unlocked the door. "Get out," he muttered. I didn't hesitate. I threw the door open, ran inside the store, and told the cashier what happened. By the time I looked back outside, the car was gone. The cashier let me stay there while I called my friend to pick me up. I was shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. Later, when I checked the rideshare app again, I saw that my real driver had arrived just a few minutes after I had gotten into the wrong car. The plate numbers were almost identical off by just one digit. That small detail nearly cost me everything. I filed a police report, but they never caught the man. To this day, I don't know who he was or what he planned to do with me, but I'll never forget the way he said, "We'll be there soon," in that flat, chilling tone. Now, every single time I use a rideshare, I triple-check the plate, the driver's name, even their face in the app, because I know how easy it is to make one small mistake. And I know what it feels like to be trapped in the wrong car, wondering if you'll ever get out. Story 3. The basement door. When I was in college, I rented a small off-campus house with 2 of my friends. It was old and a little run down, but the rent was cheap, so we didn't complain. The house had 3 bedrooms, a creaky staircase, and, most unsettling of all, a basement that none of us liked going into. The basement was unfinished, dark, and smelled like damp concrete. There was one dangling bulb that barely lit the space, and an old wooden door at the far end. We assumed it led to a storage closet, but the landlord told us it stayed locked and we didn't need to worry about it. At first, we joked about it. "That's where the bodies are," one of my roommates laughed. But as weeks went by, little things started happening that made the joke feel less funny. Every so often, when we went downstairs to do laundry, we'd notice the bulb swinging as if someone had brushed past it. Sometimes, we swore we heard faint noises, scraping or shuffling from behind that old door. One night, around 2 a.m., I was sitting in the living room, studying, when I heard it clearly. A dull thud coming from the basement. I froze, staring at the basement door across the hall. Another thud followed, this one louder, like someone hitting wood with their fist. I thought maybe one of my roommates had gone down there, so I texted both of them. They replied almost instantly, neither was home. My stomach tightened. I grabbed the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, which was a metal flashlight, and crept toward the basement door. The moment I opened it, a wave of cold air hit me. I flicked on the basement light and slowly descended the stairs. My footsteps echoed against the concrete walls, and the bulb above buzzed faintly. The thudding stopped, but when I reached the bottom, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The locked wooden door at the far end was slightly ajar, not open but cracked, just enough to show darkness beyond. I stared at it for what felt like forever. Then, from inside the crack, I heard a soft whisper. I couldn't make out words, just the sound of breathy muttering. My hands shook so badly, I almost dropped the flashlight. I bolted back upstairs and slammed the basement door shut. I shoved a chair in front of it and sat on the couch until my roommates came home. When I told them what happened, they thought I was exaggerating, but I could see the unease in their eyes. A few nights later, it happened again. This time, all three of us were in the house when we heard the noises. A dragging sound, then a faint knock. We stood frozen in the living room, staring at each other as the sounds grew louder. Finally, my roommate Mike grabbed a hammer and said, "Screw this, I'm opening it," against my protests. He went downstairs with the other roommate, following close behind. I stayed at the top of the stairs, heart racing, gripping my phone. I heard them push the door open with a loud creak. There was silence for a moment. Then Mike called up. "It's just another room. Empty." He sounded unsure though. Tia came back up, both looking pale. When I asked what was inside, they said it was just an empty cement room with no windows. But neither of them looked me in the eye as they said it. That night, both of them locked their bedroom doors for the first time. A week later, I came home to find the basement door wide open. The chair I usually kept in front of it was toppled over. I called out, thinking my roommates were home, but the house was empty. Slowly, I walked toward the basement stairs. From down below, I heard footsteps retreating, fast and heavy, like someone running deeper into the basement. I turned and ran right back out the front door. We all decided to break the lease early and move out. The landlord was angry, but we didn't care. We never told him about the noises or the open door. To this day, I don't know who or what was behind that basement door. All I know is that sometimes, in the dead of night, I still wake up with the sound of those whispers echoing in my head. Story 4. The neighbor in the hallway. I used to live in a quiet apartment building that only had about 10 units. Most of the tenants kept to themselves, except for one man who lived at the far end of the hall. He was middle-aged, always wore the same stained hoodie, and never seemed to have visitors. He didn't creep me out at first, but something about the way he stared lingered in the back of my mind. Whenever I passed him in the hallway, he would stop whatever he was doing and just watch me. He wouldn't smile or nod, just stand there, eyes following me until I got into my apartment. I told myself maybe he was just awkward, maybe lonely. Still, it made me uneasy. One night, Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment. At first, I thought nothing of it. People come and go, but the footsteps stopped directly in front of my door and stayed there. I muted the TV and sat frozen, listening. After a few moments of silence, I heard a soft, scraping noise. It sounded like someone dragging a key or coin slowly against my doorframe. Then, a low chuckle. My stomach dropped. I got up as quietly as I could and peeked through the peephole. It was him, the man from the end of the hall. He was standing just inches from my door, head tilted slightly, smiling as he traced his finger along the wood. I backed away immediately, my heart hammering in my chest. I called my friend who lived across town and whispered into the phone, asking what I should do. "Okay," she told me to call the police, but before I could, the sound stopped. I went back to the peephole and the hallway was empty. The next morning, when I left for work, there was a folded piece of paper slid under my door. In shaky handwriting, it said, "I'll watch you too." I felt sick reading it, crumpled it up, and threw it out, telling myself maybe it was just some sick joke. Okay. But over the next week, I noticed small things changing in my apartment. Okay. A chair slightly moved, a kitchen drawer left open, and my bathroom light on when I knew I had turned it off. I thought I was losing my mind until one night I came home early. As I unlocked my door, I swore I heard movement inside. I stood frozen, key halfway in the lock. Then the sound of quick footsteps darted across the apartment. I slammed the door shut and ran back down the hall to the neighbor across from me, begging to use her phone. The police came, but by the time they searched, no one was inside. Still, they found the bathroom window unlocked. Oh, I had never left it that way. I didn't sleep that night. Okay? I pushed the dresser against the door and sat up listening to every creak. The next evening, I tried to convince myself it was over. But around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of someone whispering right outside my bedroom door. I sat up slowly, every muscle in my body tense, and listened. It was his voice. I couldn't make out the words, but it was definitely him. A low, muttering tone, like he was talking to himself. I dialed 911 with trembling hands and whispered to the dispatcher that someone was inside my apartment. I was told to stay quiet and wait for officers. I clutched my phone like my life depended on it, watching the bedroom doorknob shake softly, like he was testing it. I could see the shadow of feet under the door, shifting slowly back and forth. Cute. Minutes felt like hours until finally I heard pounding on the front door. "Please." The shadow vanished, and the sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the apartment. The officers broke in moments later, but once again, no one was there. This time, though, they found something worse. A small hole had been carved into the back of my hallway closet, leading into the maintenance shaft. The man had been using it to enter my apartment whenever he wanted. The police searched the building, but never found him. The landlord changed my locks, but I moved out within the week. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even in broad daylight. It's been years since then, but I still wake up at night sometimes, convinced I hear whispering outside my bedroom door. And in those moments, I see his smile in my mind, the one I saw through the peephole, inches away from my home. Story 5. The house-sitting job when I was 20. I agreed to house-sit for a family friend while they went on vacation. It was a large, old house on the outskirts of town, surrounded by woods. The pay was good, and all I had to do was feed the dog, water a few plants, and keep an eye on the place. Simple enough, or at least, that's what I thought. The first night went by without any issues. The house was a little creepy, mostly because it was so big and empty, but the dog kept me company. His name was Max, a golden retriever who barked at every little noise. I figured he'd be my early warning system if anything happened. On the second night, I was watching TV in the living room when Max suddenly started growling at the back door. His ears were pointed up and his fur stood on end. I muted the TV and listened. At first, I heard nothing, but then came the faint sound of footsteps crunching through leaves. I froze. The nearest neighbor was half a mile away, and no one should have been walking around back there. I turned on the porch light, but when I looked through the glass, there was nothing. Just the woods, still and quiet. Max wouldn't stop growling though. I locked the door, closed the blinds, and tried to brush it off. Maybe it was a deer. But deep down, it didn't feel like that. I decided to head upstairs early, with Max following close behind me. That night, I woke up at around 3 a.m. to the sound of the dog barking wildly downstairs. I sat up, heart racing, listening as his barks turned into low, guttural growls. Then, a loud bang shook the back door, as if someone was trying to force it open. I grabbed the phone and called 911, whispering that someone was trying to break in. The dispatcher told me to stay upstairs and stay quiet. I huddled in the bedroom, clutching the phone, while Max continued barking like crazy below. Then, just as suddenly as it started, everything went quiet. Max stopped barking. The banging stopped. The silence was almost worse than the noise. I strained my ears, but I couldn't hear a single thing, not even the dog's collar jingling. The officers arrived about 15 minutes later. They searched the property, but didn't find anyone. They said the back door looked like it had been pried at with something metal, but whoever it was must have run off when they heard sirens. Max eventually reappeared, tail tucked, clearly shaken. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next day, I thought hard about whether to leave, but I didn't want to let down the family who trusted me. I convinced myself it was just a random burglar who wouldn't come back. But I was wrong. On the fourth night, I was brushing my teeth when I heard something that chilled me to the core. The sound of humming, faint, low, and drawn out. It was coming from inside the house. I shut off the faucet and stood perfectly still, listening. The humming grew louder, drifting up from the downstairs hallway. It was slow, almost like a lullaby, but I knew I was alone. My heart raced as I tiptoed to the top of the stairs and peeked down. The lights were off, but I could swear I saw movement at the far end of the hall. I ducked back into the bedroom and locked the door, grabbing my phone. But before I could dial, the humming stopped. Silence stretched out, thick and suffocating. Then a new sound began. Soft, deliberate footsteps moving slowly up the stairs. I felt my blood turn cold. I whispered Max's name, but the dog wasn't in the room with me. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs, and then they stopped right outside the bedroom door. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tense. The doorknob turned slowly, but the lock held. Whoever it was rattled it gently, then harder, until the door shook. I backed up against the wall, phone in hand, ready to call the cops again. Then, just as suddenly, the rattling stopped. I waited, trembling, listening for any sign of movement. After what felt like an eternity, I dialed 911. This time, the dispatcher stayed on the line with me until officers arrived. Once again, the intruder was gone. No broken windows, no signs of forced entry this time. But the officers did notice something I hadn't seen. The closet door in the hallway was cracked open. When they shined a flashlight inside, they found footprints in the dust on the floor. That closet led to a narrow crawl space between the walls. The officers thought whoever it was had been hiding in there, moving through the house without me noticing. Just the idea of it made me want to throw up. The police strongly suggested I leave, so I called the family I was house sitting for and explained everything. They were shocked, but they told me to go to my own place immediately and that they'd handle it when they got back. I packed my things in a rush, refusing to go back into the basement or the crawl space. Max jumped into the car with me, as if he understood it was time to get out. I drove straight home, shaking the entire way. Later, the family told me the police found evidence someone had been living in the crawl space for weeks. Empty food wrappers, a sleeping bag, even a small lantern. Whoever it was had probably been watching me the whole time, waiting for the right moment. They never caught the person. No fingerprints, no ID, nothing. Just the knowledge that someone had been there, inside the same walls I slept in. The family eventually sold the house. I never set foot in it again. To this day, I still house sit sometimes, but only for small apartments, never big houses in the woods. And every time I hear a creak in the night, I think about that humming. The slow, eerie tunes drifting up from the dark, and I wonder if the person in that crawl space was singing to me. Story 6. The woods behind my house. I grew up in a rural town, and my childhood home backed right up to a thick patch of woods. During the day, it was peaceful birds chirping, deer passing through, but at night, the woods seemed different. It's dark, endless, and full of sounds I couldn't place. My parents always told me never to go too deep in there after sundown. For years, nothing strange happened. But when I was 17, I started noticing odd things. Small piles of stones arranged in shapes near the edge of the trees, sticks tied together with twine hanging from low branches. At first, I thought it was just kids messing around. One summer night, I was sitting on the back porch scrolling through my phone when I heard it, singing. It was faint, carried on the breeze, but definitely human. Slow, humming tune, coming from somewhere in the woods. I froze, listening. It didn't sound like kids. Curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a flashlight and walked a few steps into the trees. The singing stopped immediately. The silence that followed felt heavy, like the woods were holding their breath. I quickly backed out and went inside, locking the door. Over the next week, I heard it 3 more times, always around midnight, always the same strange melody. I stopped going out on the porch after dark, but I couldn't stop listening from my bedroom window. Each night, it seemed a little louder. One night, my dog started barking like crazy at the tree line. When I shined a light out there, I caught something that made my stomach drop. A figure standing just beyond the reach of the light, tall and thin, completely still. The dog barked louder, but when I blinked, the figure was gone. I told my parents, but they brushed it off. It's probably a neighbor cutting through, my dad said. But we didn't have neighbors close enough for that to make sense. And no one should have been standing that still, that late at night. A few nights later, I woke up to a soft tapping at my window. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor, so my first thought was a branch. But when I looked, I saw a hand. A pale, bony hand tapping lightly on the glass. I shot up in bed, heart racing, and grabbed my phone. Before I could even dial, the hand slid out of sight. I flicked on my light, pulled the curtains closed, and stayed awake till sunrise, shaking under the covers. The next day, I searched the ground beneath my window. There were footprints in the dirt. Bare feet, long, narrow prints that didn't look normal. They led straight back into the woods and disappeared. That night, I begged my parents to let me call the police, but they insisted it was just some weird hiker. I knew better. I set an alarm for midnight and sat up in bed with a baseball bat beside me, listening. Sure enough, around 12:30, the singing started again. This time, it was closer. I could hear the words now, though they didn't sound like English. Slow, drawn-out syllables in a low, monotone voice. My whole body broke out in goosebumps. Suddenly, Max the dog started growling downstairs. A moment later, he was barking like mad. I ran to my parents' room, but before I could wake them, a loud crash came from the living room. The sound of glass shattering. We all rushed downstairs. The front window was broken, shards of glass all over the floor. Max stood, snarling at the opening, but whoever had been there was gone. My dad called the police this time, and they came out to investigate. The officers searched the woods with flashlights, but found nothing. They told us it was probably a vandal, and that we should keep the doors locked. I wanted to believe that, but deep down, I didn't. Something about those footprints haunted me. For the next few days, everything was quiet. No singing, no tapping. I almost convinced myself it was over. But then, one evening, I noticed something strange hanging from the tree line. A bundle of sticks tied with twine, dangling from a branch. When I got closer, I saw something woven into it. My missing baseball cap. The one I'd lost weeks earlier. My stomach dropped as I realized someone had been close enough to take it. Someone who wanted me to know they'd been watching. That night, I barely slept. At around 2 a.m., I heard the creak of the back porch steps. I held my breath, clutching the bat again. Then came a slow knock on the back door. Not hurried, not forceful, just steady, patient knocks. My dad stormed downstairs with his shotgun, but when he flung open the door, no one was there. Only another bundle of sticks, this one left on the porch mat. Tied inside was one of my socks. The police came again the next day, but once again, they found nothing. They suggested maybe it was a prank. But the looks on their faces told me they didn't really believe that either. Eventually, my parents decided to sell the house. Within a month, we were gone. I never set foot in those woods again. Still, sometimes late at night, when I'm outside, I swear I hear faint singing on the wind. It's that same low, haunting melody that followed me to the edge of the trees. And I wonder if it ever really stayed behind, or if it's still following me. Story 7. The motel room. A couple of years ago, I was driving cross-country to visit family. Around midnight, I decided I was too tired to keep going and pulled into a small roadside motel. The place looked old, with a flickering neon sign that just read, "Vacancy." I didn't think much of it. I just needed a place to sleep. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of mildew. An older man sat behind the desk, watching a tiny TV with the volume low. He barely looked up when I asked for a room. "Cash only," he muttered. That should have been a red flag, but I was exhausted. He gave me a key to room 6. The hallway was dim, the carpet stained in dampened spots. When I unlocked the door, the first thing I noticed was the smell still. Like cigarette smoke mixed with something rotten. But the bed looked clean enough, so I set my bag down and tried not to think about it. I closed the curtains and lay down, scrolling through my phone until I drifted off. At some point in the night, I woke to a strange sound. It was faint, muffled, like someone crying. I sat up, disoriented, trying to figure out where it was coming from. The sound grew louder, and I realized it wasn't coming through the walls. It was coming from under the bed. My skin went cold. Slowly, I leaned over and peeked beneath. But there was nothing. Just darkness and the edge of the carpet. I told myself I was imagining it, climbed back into bed, pulled the blanket over me, and closed my eyes. Then came another sound, a whisper, low, raspy, right next to my ear. My eyes shot open, and I whipped my head around. No one was there. I turned on the lamp and left it on, sitting upright, heart pounding. The room felt wrong, heavy, like someone else was in there with me. That's when I noticed something I hadn't before. The closet door was cracked open, just an inch. I was sure I'd closed it earlier. I stared at it for what felt like forever. Finally, I forced myself to get up and shove it closed. I even pushed a chair in front of it before climbing back into bed. The crying sound didn't come back, but I barely slept. In the morning, I went to check out. The man at the front desk gave me a strange look. "You stayed in 6?" he asked slowly, as if surprised. When I nodded, his eyes flicked to the TV, then back to me. "That room's supposed to be locked." Confused, I told him I'd gotten the key from him the night before. He shook his head. 6 hasn't been rented out in years. My stomach twisted. I asked why, but he just muttered, "Don't worry about it," and turned back to his TV. I left quickly, but curiosity gnawed at me. A week later, I looked up news about that motel, found an article from years earlier. Room 6 had been the site of a murder. A woman was killed there by her boyfriend. Guests, after that, complained of noises, crying, whispers, voices from the closet. The article said the motel had shut the room down after too many reports. Yet somehow, I'd been given the key. Or maybe, something wanted me in there. Thinking back, I can still hear that whisper by my ear. It's the way it rasped, almost like words I couldn't understand. And when I wake up in strange hotels now, I swear I hear it again. A faint sob, drifting up from somewhere just out of sight. And I wonder if I really left room 6 behind. Story 8. The stranger on the bus. It was late on a Friday night when I boarded the last bus heading home. The city was quiet, and the bus was almost empty. Just me, the driver, and a man sitting all the way at the back. His hood was pulled up, and he was slouched low in his seat. I didn't pay much attention at first. I took a seat near the middle, close enough to the driver to feel safe, but far enough back not to seem nervous. The bus rumbled through the empty streets, stopping only once or twice to let someone off. Each time I noticed the man in the back never moved. About 15 minutes into the ride, I started to feel uneasy. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, I swore he was sitting differently, leaning forward, angled slightly toward me. Cut, when I looked directly, he was always still. The bus grew emptier until finally it was just me and him. That's when I noticed something unsettling. His hood slipped back just enough for me to catch his face in the dim light. He wasn't blinking. He was just staring at me. I quickly turned around, trying to ignore it. The driver was humming to himself, unaware of the tension in the bus. My hands were sweating as I gripped the pole beside me. I told myself maybe the man was drunk or high, but then I heard it. The sound of footsteps moving down the aisle, slow, deliberate, one step at a time. My stomach tightened. I didn't dare look back until I felt the weight of someone standing just a few feet behind my seat. I turned slightly and caught a glimpse of him. His eyes were wide, unblinking. A strange grin spread across his face. "You smell nice," he whispered. His voice was raspy, almost playful, but it made my skin crawl. I bolted up and moved quickly to the very front, sitting right behind the driver. The man laughed softly and returned to the back of the bus, but he didn't stop staring. I told the driver quietly that someone was bothering me. The driver frowned and glanced in the mirror. "Sir, stay in your seat," he called, but the man just smiled wider and licked his lips, never breaking eye contact with me. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I'd faint. When the bus reached my stop, I hesitated. The man stood up at the exact same time. I panicked and whispered to the driver, asking if he could wait while I ran. The driver nodded. K darted off the bus and sprinted up the street. I looked back once and saw the man step off slowly, watching me. He didn't chase me. He just stood there, head tilted, that grin still plastered on his face. I kept running until I was out of sight. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured his face. The wide eyes, the frozen smile. But what unsettled me most was his last move before I turned the corner. He raised his hand and waved at me. The next morning, I debated whether to call the police. What could I say? A weird guy on the bus looked at me funny. They'd never take it seriously, so I tried to move on. But then, things got worse. A few days later, I was walking home from work when I noticed a figure across the street. A tall man in a hood. He was standing still, facing me. The moment I turned my head, he walked into an alley. I told myself it wasn't him. It couldn't be. But the following night, I saw him again. This time, closer. Standing under a streetlight, watching, not moving, always silent. I finally called the police, but by the time they arrived, the man was gone. They told me to stay cautious, avoid walking alone, and call immediately if I saw him again. But how do you avoid someone who already knows where you live? A week later, I woke up in the middle of the night. My room was dark, but something felt wrong. I glanced at the window and froze. A figure stood outside, face pressed against the glass. Even in the shadows, I recognized that grin. I screamed, and my roommate came running. By the time he turned on the light, the figure was gone. We called the police again, but just like before, there was no trace. No footprints, no evidence, nothing. Since then, I've moved across the city, changed numbers, even switched jobs. But sometimes, late at night, I still catch glimpses of him. A hooded figure across the street at a bus stop, standing in a crowd. He never approaches anymore. He just watches, silent, patient, smiling. And I know one day he's going to get close again. Story 9. The attic door. When I was a kid, my family lived in an old farmhouse in the countryside. The house was charming but creaky, with uneven floors and drafty windows. I tell what always unsettled me most was the attic. The door to it was at the end of the upstairs hallway, and I hated walking past it at night. The door was strange. Didn't have a knob, just an old, rusty latch. My parents kept it locked with a padlock, claiming it was full of junk from the previous owners. But sometimes, late at night, I'd hear noises from up there, shuffling, faint thuds, and sometimes what sounded like whispering. One night, when I was about 12, I was heading to bed when I noticed the padlock was hanging open. The door was slightly ajar. I froze in the hallway, staring at the crack of darkness beyond it. My mom must have forgotten to close it, I thought. I closed it quickly and snapped the padlock shut, but as I turned to walk away, I swear I heard something move on the other side. A faint, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. My heart pounded as I rushed to my room. Over the next few weeks, I noticed the door cracked open more and more often. My parents insisted they weren't unlocking it, but I never saw them check. Sometimes, when I got up for water in the middle of the night, I'd find it slightly open, the darkness inside, feeling alive. One night, curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a flashlight and decided to peek inside. The air that poured out was stale, thick with dust. I aimed the light inside and saw piles of old furniture, boxes, and broken picture frames. It looked harmless enough. But then I noticed something unsettling. In the far corner, behind the junk, stood what looked like a chair. On it sat a figure. My breath caught in my throat, but when I blinked and focused the light again, the chair was empty. I slammed the door shut and ran to my room, heart racing. I tried to convince myself my eyes were just playing tricks, but deep down, I knew I'd seen someone or something sitting there. The following nights, the noises grew louder. The whispers seemed clearer, though I couldn't make out words. Once, I thought I heard my name, Kane, drawn out, as if someone was calling me from the attic. I begged my parents to nail the door shut, but they laughed it off. "It's just your imagination," they said. But I knew better. I started sleeping with headphones on, trying to drown out the noises. One stormy night, the power went out. The house was pitch black, and every sound felt amplified. I was lying in bed, listening to the wind, when I heard it, the slow creak of the attic door opening. My stomach dropped. I grabbed my flashlight and crept into the hallway. The door was wide open, swinging gently with the draft. My light barely cut through the darkness inside, but I could see the outline of the chair again. This time, it wasn't empty. A figure sat there, hunched, with its head tilted. Its face was pale, featureless, except for two hollow eyes that seemed to glisten in the light. It didn't move, but I felt its stare burn into me. I slammed my bedroom door, locked it, and hid under the covers until morning. When daylight came, I checked again. The attic door was closed, the padlock fastened. My parents swore they hadn't touched it. Weeks passed, and things went quiet. But then, one night, I woke to the sound of footsteps above my room, slow, deliberate pacing, directly over my bed. I knew it had to be the attic. I lay frozen, praying the noises would stop. Instead, I heard something worse. The sound of the padlock snapping open, its metal clinking as the latch lifted. Then, the creak of the attic door swinging wide again. The footsteps came down the hall, soft but steady. I could hear the old floorboards groan under the weight. They stopped outside my room. I held my breath, clutching the blanket. The doorknob turned slowly. My door wasn't locked, so I braced myself, heart pounding so loud I thought it would burst. But after a long pause, the knob released. The footsteps retreated, back down the hall, back up the attic stairs. The next morning, I asked my parents if they'd been upstairs during the night. They swore they hadn't. I showed them the padlock, but it was still in place, as if it had never been touched. Years later, when we finally moved out, I decided to peek into the attic one last time. Dust coated everything, untouched for years. But in the far corner, the chair was still there. Only this time, there were deep indentations in the seat, cushioned like someone had been sitting there night after night. I shut the door for the last time, but the image of those hollow eyes never left me. Even now, in my own apartment, I sometimes wake to the sound of footsteps above me, and I wonder if something followed me when we left that house. Story 10. The night security job. I used to work as a night security guard at an office complex just outside the city. The pay wasn't great, but it was quiet work. All I had to do was make rounds, check cameras, and keep the place locked down. At first, I thought it would be the easiest job I'd ever had. The building was huge, 5 floors of empty offices, hallways, and conference rooms. At night, it felt like a maze. The hum of the fluorescent lights was constant, and sometimes the pipes rattled. I got used to the creepy silence pretty quickly. But a few weeks in, strange things started happening. It began with little stuff lights flickering in rooms I hadn't touched, doors swinging shut on their own, and the elevator moving between floors with no one inside. I brushed it off as electrical issues. Then, one night, while watching the cameras, I saw something that froze me. A figure standing at the end of the third floor hallway. It was tall and thin, completely still. The camera quality was bad, so I thought maybe it was a trick of the shadows. I flipped through the other angles, and when I returned to that camera, the figure was gone. I laughed nervously to myself, trying to calm down. But when I went upstairs to check, the hallway was freezing cold, like the air conditioning was blasting only there. The next few nights, I saw it again, sometimes standing in the lobby, sometimes in the stairwell, always still, always watching. By the time I'd go to check, it was gone. I stopped mentioning it to my boss because I didn't want to sound crazy. One night, during my rounds, I heard something I couldn't ignore. Footsteps, heavy, echoing footsteps above me on the 5th floor. I radioed to see if another guard was on shift, but I was alone that night. Against my better judgment, I went up. The 5th floor was empty, all the offices dark, but the footsteps continued, moving just ahead of me down the hall. I followed slowly, flashlight shaking in my hand. Then they stopped. The silence pressed in around me. That's when I noticed a door slightly open. It was one of the conference rooms. I pushed it open with my flashlight, and my stomach dropped. The chairs were all stacked in the center of the room, arranged in a circle, like someone had been sitting there. On the whiteboard, written in red marker, were the words, "We see you." The marker was still uncapped on the ledge. My hands went clammy as I backed out. I knew I was supposed to call my supervisor, but I couldn't explain what I was seeing. Later that night, watching the cameras again, I caught movement on the 5th floor. Not just one figure, this time 3. They stood in the circle of chairs, unmoving, their heads tilted upward like they were staring at the ceiling. I watched for as long as I could, but eventually the feed glitched and cut out. When it came back, the room was empty again. My chest tightened. I didn't leave the security office until the sun came up. The next night, things escalated. I was doing my usual rounds when I heard a voice, faint, echoing down the hall. It was saying my name. At first, I thought it was the radio, but the voice was too clear, too close. I followed it against every instinct telling me not to. The voice led me to the stairwell. I peered down, and there it was. A figure standing on the landing below, head tilted back, staring directly at me. I couldn't see its face, but I felt it smiling. I bolted back to the office and locked the door. My hands shook as I tried to calm down. The cameras flickered again, showing static. Then, for just a second, every monitor lit up with the same image. The figure, inches from the lens, pale face pressed against the glass. That was the first night I seriously considered quitting. But I needed a job, and I convinced myself I was just overtired, till the night I realized I wasn't the only one who'd seen them. An older guard I sometimes relieved pulled me aside one morning. "You've seen them, haven't you?" he asked quietly. My stomach dropped. I tried to play dumb, but he shook his head. "Don't bother. They always show themselves sooner or later." I asked him what they were, but he just muttered, "Keep your head down. Don't acknowledge them. It's how they notice you." His eyes looked hollow, like he hadn't slept in years. The next shift, I tried to ignore everything. No checking noises, no investigating the cameras, but it didn't matter. Around 3 a.m., the office door handle started to rattle. Slowly, steadily. Okay? I held my breath, praying it was just a draft. Then came 3 loud knocks. Not on the door, on the glass wall beside me. I whipped around, and my blood ran cold. The figure was right there, face pressed against the glass, eyes black and bottomless. I stumbled back, and the glass fogged with its breath. I blinked, and it was gone. The hallway outside was empty, but the foggy imprint of a face remained on the glass, slowly fading. I couldn't take it anymore. I told my boss I was quitting. He didn't look surprised, okay? He just sighed and said, "Another one? It's fine. Leave your badge." I realized then that I was NT the first to walk out because of whatever haunted that building. It's been years since then, but I still dream about those nights. Sometimes, in the dream, I'm back in the security office, watching the cameras. And no matter which monitor I look at, the figure is there, closer and closer each time. And sometimes, when I wake up late at night, I swear I hear those heavy footsteps outside my bedroom door.